Hello, this is Benton C. Bainbridge speaking to you from the Art House UK in Wakefield near Leeds. I'm here at the Art House UK preparing for our show. Art House invited us to perform at the Index Festival. So tomorrow, Rue Bainbridge, myself, and Gryphon Rue will do an improvised audiovisual duo at the Hepworth Wakefield Museum in Gallery 6, responding to the sculptures and other artworks, the space and the people and time to do an improvised 1 hour performance. So I'm just thought to show you a quick tour of my light drawing synthesizer that I will use for the show tomorrow. As you can see, I have a modified Vectrex video game console, and it's being fed by this modular synthesizer I've designed. I have 1, 2, 3 signals from the synth that are feeding the horizontal, vertical, and brightness. So if I pull these cables, basically you'll see that the built-in video game in the Vectrex is still working, but by putting in these plugs, the switching jack will switch from the internal game to the external signal from the synth in the horizontal, and then vertical, and then finally the third signal driving the brightness. And the modules that I have feeding this Vectrex are mostly oscillators, going into 2 different mixers for the horizontal and the vertical, and a third mixer which I'm using for the brightness, as well as to add a joystick which allows me to position the image, or I'll show you later, I sometimes use ring modulators so I can automatically flip and spin the image. So finally, those signals all, before going to the Vectrex, I send them into this Dave Jones tabby, and the tabby is simply a utility module that allows me to attenuate, boost, or invert the signal going to the horizontal, so I can flip it, and the vertical, and finally the brightness. So I can use this to start the show. For example, I can fade up in brightness, or I can otherwise trim the brightness of the signal. Let's go through all the different modules in here. So again, these 2 mixers are driving the horizontal and vertical, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 signals going into it. I'm going to turn down the 5th oscillator here, and the 4th oscillator, and then we get a beam. I'm just going to quickly turn that down a little bit so I don't burn the Vectrex. So the first 3 inputs are these 3 Dave Jones VO1 video oscillator ones. Those are coming out very shortly. Maybe even by the time you watch this, they'll be out in production. And then these 3 utility modules, the CV ones, convert the Dave Jones type signal, which is +1 to -1 peak to peak, 2 volts peak to peak. It converts it into a standard Euro rack -5 to +5, 10 volt peak to peak signal. So let's take a look at those. So if I go to input 1 of the horizontal mixer and of the vertical mixer, and turn those up, and then turn up the brightness, you can see I'm actually going to turn down the joystick as well, so the planar is not doing anything. So this is the signal from the first of the Dave Jones VO1s, and so if I just turn it down, for example, it's just generating a sine wave. So right now this is running in a quadrature sine mode, and I'm taking 2 signals out of phase, 90 degrees out of phase, so that I get a sine wave and a cosine. And if I turn the frequency up, eventually I just get an oval. I can make that oval more circular by attenuating the amount of horizontal and vertical signals. And then one of the beautiful things about this is that you have very extensive modulation. Right now, these three are cross-modulating one another. So, for example, I can turn up the amount of modulation here, and then I can get some pretty beautiful, crazy shapes. And then, likewise, I could also turn up the phase here, and that gives me some really nice modulation possibilities as well. So again, like I said, right now they're cross-modulating, so this is being modulated from the third VO1, and so if I turn down or up this oscillator, I can get quite different kinds of shapes and action going on. So the second and the third VO1s are sent into the second and third inputs of the mixer, and these likewise do similar things, and this second VO1 is modulated by the first one. So if I, for example, turn down the frequency of the first one, you can see I can do slower modulation of the phase and of the frequency of that second oscillator. And finally, I'll turn those down and then turn up the third. So likewise with the third VO1, that's being modulated by the second one. And that allows us to do various kinds of shapes of the galactic sort. Moving on to the next oscillator, we have a Rubicon, first generation IntelliGel Rubicon. That's coming into 4. So I'm going to turn that up and turn down 3. And then 4, the Rubicon is currently patched from the triangle and the sine, and because the sine has this sine type switch, I can switch between different types of shapes here. So I can do this kind of tilde shape, a rounded triangle, or an X or hourglass kind of shape. And then you'll note that this is worth pointing out now, this Dixie 2, the third one in the row, this is how I'm controlling my brightness, the Z input of the Vectrex. And that one is taking sync from the square wave of the Rubicon. So I'm able to do stable shapes where it doesn't really drift very much. So I can get the shape to, be pretty stable when I'm looking at just the Rubicon. I often switch during live performance to sync different oscillators, and you can see, for example, well, I'll show you some more later. So finally, the last oscillator is this W0 that comes into 5. So I'm going to turn that up. And so the W0 can go, right now I have it set up to come out from these two outputs going to horizontal and vertical. And this switch here on the W0 switches between a square wave and a triangle wave. And so, sorry, let me turn that down a little bit so you can see it. And so that allows me to, create rectangles, or by hitting the switch to create triangles. So I combine all these different signals to create all the many different kinds of drawings that I do. So just as an example, if I were to combine, say, the Mungo and the first Jones VO1, on the horizontal, it starts to shake that triangle, and then on the vertical, I can get the triangle to sort of spin around. And it gets much more complex than that, as I'm sure you can imagine. The spinning can be